So I actually have two problems in this shop, and both of those problems are in this video right now. Can you guess what they are? Any guesses, Marge? No? Okay. The first problem I have are these two cabinets. That one, super inconvenient to get to. This one is all my finishing supplies and it's always a mess. Problem number two, I have all these parts organizers but nowhere to put them and they always get in the way. Let's see if we can fix that today. Let's go. I start this project by figuring out where I want to put these cabinets. I know I have plenty of wall space in between the joiner and the mini split, and a big section of empty wall right next to it. So that looks like the ideal spot. And once I've figured out where I want them, I just move all my stuff up. Wait, gotta build the cabinets first. So take a trip to the local lumber yard and get 2 sheets of 3/4 inch plywood and 2 sheets of 1/4 inch plywood. And that was all the lumber that I used for this build. And I'd like to give a huge shout out to Drew over at Woodworks and Travis at Shop Nation for giving me the inspiration with the Maker of the Month challenge to get this project knocked off the to-do list, because it's been on there for a while and finally getting it done. So thanks guys, and let's get to building these cabinets. Oof. Man, plywood's heavy. The first thing I do is cut this piece of plywood in half just so it's lighter and easier to handle. Once it's cut, I bring them over to the table saw and I cut a bunch of strips all at different widths, and this will make up the top, bottom, sides, and interior bracing of the cabinets. And if anyone's interested in the exact measurements of all these pieces, I will leave a link in the video description with a full cut list. And here I just stack up all the pieces that I cut. Then it is over to the miter saw to get these pieces cut down to their final lengths. And just take your time here, that way it all goes together nice and smooth later. Now it's back over to the table saw to cut the dado groove for the back panel. So for this I set the height of the blade to 3/8 of an inch, use a scrap piece of plywood as a spacer block, because that's what I'll use as the nailer strips for the back, and this sets up your saw perfectly. Once your saw is all set up, you just slowly run your pieces through, making sure to keep pressure down onto the saw blade and up against the fence, that way it's nice and square. Then after you run all your pieces through, you move your fence over 1/8 of an inch and you run all your pieces back through again. And this will make a perfect 1/4 inch groove in the back of all the pieces for that back panel to slide into. And it should look a little something like this when you get finished. Before I move on to assembling these cabinets, I went ahead and drilled all the adjustable shelf pin holes, just because this is easier to do whenever the cabinet isn't assembled and hanging on the wall, and then you don't have to fight gravity whenever you're trying to drill these. So just easier to do this beforehand instead of waiting and trying to do this while they're hanging on the wall. The final step before assembly is just cutting the back panels for the cabinets, and I just did this over the table saw. Now let's move on to assembly. First I lay out my pieces and I take the 2 sides, lay them out, and this is when I realized that I made 2 left panels instead of left and a right. Good job. Real good job. But luckily this is a YouTube video, so easy fix. I just magically made another one. Now that I have a left and a right panel, I start by putting the right panel on first, and then I slide the left panel in place, and then I do the bottom and then the top. And to hold this thing together, I just put some brad nails in the top and bottom, and this just keeps it all held together until I can go back and reinforce it later. Looks like a cabinet. Nice. Alright, on to the big one. For the big one, I did make a left and a right. I promise. I didn't just edit it out. Anyway, I did make a left and a right and slid the right side on first. Then I slid the bottom panel on and then slid the left, and I went ahead and tacked those in place. Then the next step was to stand this monster cabinet up and put the top on. This is where I ran into more problems. This back panel fit like a glove. And by like a glove, I mean like trying to squeeze my hands into a extra large glove. It was way too big. Not way too big. It was like 1/4 inch too big. So off camera, I took that back panel out, trimmed it up by 1/4 inch, and then slid it back in. And this time, it really fit. The next step is to mark out all my dado cuts on my center boards, and these will later become shelves for all these small parts organizers. So I start by laying out a line every 3 inches, and then I put an X on the side of the line that needed to be cut. And this just ensures that I don't accidentally cut on the wrong side of the line over at the table saw. Then at the table saw, I just take my time and slowly make a 1/4 inch dado on all these lines, making sure to stay on the side that had marked an X on it. And believe it or not, I actually didn't mess this up and didn't cut on the wrong side of the line. Then I used the scrap pieces from the back panels and cut a bunch of little squares at the table saw to make the shelves. Then it's over to the workbench to see if all this fits together. And so far it looks pretty good. This took me a couple tries to get all these lined up perfectly, but went together pretty smooth. And then once I got it all together, I took one of the parts organizers and just tested the fit to be sure that they would fit in every shelf and that I didn't make any mistakes. And alright, looks good. Oh, and this did have a bunch of screws in it, so it kind of sounded like a tambourine. So, a little tambourine dance. Anyway, back to work. Now it's time to get the center shelf added to the big cabinet. And I'm going to be completely honest with y'all. This is when my video skills just really came in clutch. Because I ran out of storage on my phone and it cut off halfway through this. And it actually went really smooth, and I hate that I missed it all. But here's what I got. And now I'll just show you a finished product. Get it spun around, and ooh yeah, that's looking pretty good. Not too shabby for my first time making upper cabinets. Now it's time to move on to the second sheet of plywood. This sheet is going to be used for the cabinet doors, the interior shelves, and the nailer strips on the back of the cabinets. So I start by cutting out the shelves first, and then I use these scrap pieces from my offcuts as the rest of the stuff. For the nailer strips, I ended up just using pocket screws and pocket holes, and these nailer strips really add a lot of rigidity to the cabinets and kind of help square them all up with those nice square edges on the boards. One more thing I did to help reinforce the cabinets was to add some screws from the top and bottom. And you can see here my OCD got the best of me. But I marked them all out, pre-drilled, and then screwed them all in. And I just went straight in from the top and the bottom because, well, you're not going to see the tops and you're only going to see the bottoms if you're laying on the floor. And I don't want to lay on the floor anymore. That's why I'm building these cabinets. To make hanging these cabinets easier, I put a scrap piece of plywood up on the wall, made sure it was nice and level, and then I could just sit the cabinet right on top of that strip of plywood and screw it right through the back through the nailer strips and into the studs. Super easy, super sturdy.
Why does she look so happy?
Because she built it. She helped
You
me.
built these, Margie?
After Margie was done taking credit for building all these cabinets and getting some loving, I convinced my wife to help me lift this big cabinet up in place. And this is when I learned why they don't make 48-inch upper cabinets. Because this thing was really flipping heavy. I don't know how I would have done this by myself. Luckily, my wife's super nice and is always willing to help me out in the shop. So, with her help, we just lifted this thing up. Super easy, as you can tell by our faces. And once it's in place, set it on that piece of plywood, and then just put some screws in it through the back, through the nailer strips, and into the studs. And then as I go back and reinforce it and add more screws, my wife decided to double check my work and make sure that all these small parts organizers are actually going to fit in the shelves that I built. And luckily they did, because that would have been embarrassing.
Let's see, let's find something in here that would fit perfectly.
The hunt begins.
Some gloves.
It doesn't.
No, because they have the hang-up spot.
Then a couple days later, it was back into the shop to get this project finished. And it looks like someone did some shopping. Well, this is a good time to let everyone know. I would like to thank the sponsor of this video, which is, it's myself. I mean, no one's going to sponsor these dumb videos. Anyway, let's get to work. So I start by measuring out the opening for the cabinets that I will need to make the doors. Then I get the cabinet doors cut down to their final dimensions. Then I use my Craig jig to drill out the holes for the cabinet hardware. And I'll just do one at the top and one at the bottom. Then once I get the holes drilled out, I just screw the hardware to the door. And then I take the door over to the cabinet. I did use some jigsaw blades as spacers just to keep a little gap at the bottom of the cabinet. And this actually worked really good. Then I just reached in, screwed the cabinet hardware from inside the cabinet, and worked great. I used the same technique to connect the other 3 doors. So, use jigsaw blades as jigs. I mean, it's literally got jig in the name, right? Then I use the Craig hardware jig to drill out all the holes for the handle hardware for these cabinets. And this jig works great. Then you just slide the hardware in, screw it, and tighten it down. Easy peasy. Then the last thing to do is add the pins for the shelves, insert the shelves, and that's it. These cabinets are done. All the shelves are in. Time to load these bad boys up. I load the first cabinet down with all my finishing supplies, all my different stains, polyurethanes, some Rubio Monocoat, because this is a YouTube video. Gotta have it in there somewhere, right? In the second cabinet, I put some wood glue, paint thinner, and I have a lot of space for a bunch of other stuff. I'll figure that out later. And then I slide all the parts organizers in there, and they fit great. The only thing I couldn't figure out was what to do with this bottom little bitty space. Oh well.